Donald Trump has suddenly changed his schedule. Meetings reportedly rearranged, appearances delayed, and behind closed doors, urgent discussions about Iran are now fueling intense speculation inside Washington. For the past few hours, one question has started dominating political circles and American media. Is the United States preparing for imminent military strikes? Because what is worrying analysts right now is not just Trump's tone. It's the speed at which everything appears to be escalating. Military assets are being repositioned. American bases across the region are reportedly on heightened alert. And the rhetoric between Washington and Tehran is becoming more aggressive by the hour. Officially, nobody is talking about war. But unofficially, the atmosphere is starting to resemble the tense moments that usually come before a major escalation. And this is exactly why Trump's sudden movements are attracting so much attention. When a figure like Donald Trump abruptly shifts priorities during a geopolitical crisis, people immediately start asking what is happening behind the scenes. Because Trump has always cultivated unpredictability as a political weapon. Sometimes he escalates pressure dramatically. Sometimes he pulls back at the last second. And that uncertainty alone can shake entire regions. But this time feels different. According to several reports and insiders close to the situation, conversations around Iran have intensified rapidly in recent days. The concern inside diplomatic circles is that one single incident could trigger a chain reaction nobody fully controls anymore. And the timing could not be worse. The Middle East is already under enormous pressure. Military tensions are rising, proxy conflicts are expanding, and global powers are watching every move carefully, which means that even a limited American strike could send shockwaves far beyond the region itself. Oil markets could react instantly, global trade routes could be disrupted, and allies on both sides could suddenly be pulled into a much larger confrontation. That is why Trump's sudden schedule change is being taken so seriously. Because in moments like this, what leaders do behind the scenes often matters more than what they say publicly. And tonight, one question is hanging over Washington. Is this another pressure tactic from Donald Trump, or the first sign that something much bigger is already in motion? For weeks, tensions in the Middle East have been building quietly in the background. Small incidents, military warnings, drone activity, threats exchanged through speeches and indirect messages. But now, the atmosphere is beginning to change. Because what once looked like another regional standoff is starting to feel far more serious. And at the center of all this attention stands Donald Trump. The reason is simple. When Trump changes his tone on Iran, global markets, diplomats, and military strategists immediately pay attention. Because unlike traditional American presidents, Trump operates differently. He does not rely only on diplomacy. He relies heavily on unpredictability. That unpredictability became one of the defining features of his presidency. One day, he could threaten devastating military action. The next day, he could suggest negotiations or claim he wants to avoid war completely. And that strategy created constant uncertainty for allies and enemies alike. But here is what makes the current situation especially dangerous. Nobody knows whether the latest signals coming from Trump are part of a pressure campaign or preparation for something more concrete. And in geopolitics, uncertainty itself can become a weapon. Because once military forces begin repositioning, once emergency meetings start happening behind closed doors, and once intelligence agencies increase monitoring, the risk of miscalculation rises dramatically. That is exactly what international observers fear right now, especially because the relationship between Washington and Tehran has been deteriorating for years. The distrust is deep, the rhetoric is aggressive, and both sides understand that even a limited confrontation could spiral out of control extremely quickly. What worries analysts even more is the regional context. The Middle East today is far more unstable than it was a few years ago. Several armed groups across the region are connected directly or indirectly to Iran. American military bases remain exposed in multiple countries. and global shipping routes near strategic waterways remain highly vulnerable, which means a single strike could trigger reactions across several fronts almost immediately. And that is why every public appearance, every statement, and every sudden movement from Trump is now being analyzed in real time. Because history has shown that geopolitical escalations often begin with signals that seem small at first. A canceled trip, an emergency call, an unusual military deployment. Then suddenly, the situation moves faster than anyone expected. And tonight, the biggest fear inside diplomatic circles is that the current tension may already be entering that phase. Right now, the biggest concern among military analysts is not whether tensions exist. That part is already obvious. The real concern is identifying the exact moment where pressure turns into direct military action. Because in situations like this, escalation rarely happens through a formal declaration. It usually begins with one incident, one attack, one drone strike, one intelligence report, or one move interpreted as crossing a red line. And according to several defense observers, the current environment is full of those risks. The United States has military assets spread across the Middle East, bases, naval forces, aircraft carriers, thousands of personnel stationed in strategic locations. That means Washington is constantly monitoring potential threats in the region. Now imagine this scenario. An American base comes under attack. A drone strike targets U.S. personnel. Or intelligence suggests preparations for a larger operation against American interests. At that point, pressure on the White House to respond militarily would become enormous. And historically, American responses in these situations are designed to be fast, precise, and highly symbolic. The first targets would likely be strategic military infrastructure, missile systems, command centers, weapons storage facilities, or positions connected to Iranian regional operations. But this is where the danger becomes extremely serious, because Iran's military strategy is not based only on direct confrontation. It also relies heavily on regional influence and allied groups operating across multiple countries, which means even a limited American strike could immediately trigger retaliation elsewhere. And that retaliation may not happen in just one location. It could involve attacks on military bases, disruptions near critical shipping routes, cyber operations, or coordinated actions carried out through regional allies. This is why experts fear a chain reaction, because once both sides begin responding to each other, controlling escalation becomes incredibly difficult. And there is another major factor making this situation even more sensitive: the global economy. The Middle East remains one of the most strategically important regions in the world for energy and international trade. If tensions explode, oil prices could surge within hours, financial markets could panic, shipping routes could become unstable, and governments worldwide would immediately face economic consequences. That is why global powers are watching Washington so closely right now, not because war has officially started, but because history has shown that geopolitical crises can accelerate very quickly once military action begins. And tonight, many analysts believe the situation may already be approaching that critical threshold. At the center of this entire crisis, one question continues to dominate discussions in Washington. What is Donald Trump actually trying to do? Is this another high-pressure strategy designed to intimidate Iran without starting a war? Or are these the early signs of a genuine military preparation happening behind the scenes? And that question matters enormously because Trump's political style has always been built around uncertainty. Throughout his presidency, Trump repeatedly used psychological pressure as a strategic tool. He understood something very well. In international politics, fear and unpredictability can sometimes be just as powerful as military force itself. That is why he often preferred maximum pressure tactics, strong rhetoric, unexpected announcements, sudden military positioning, public warnings designed to keep opponents guessing. The goal was simple: create enough uncertainty that the other side hesitates, backs down, or makes concessions before an actual conflict even begins. And in some situations, that strategy worked. But the problem is that this approach also carries enormous risks, because when tensions are already extremely high, unpredictability can become dangerous very quickly. The more pressure both sides apply, the smaller the margin for error becomes. One misunderstanding, one overreaction, one incident interpreted incorrectly, and suddenly, leaders may find themselves trapped inside an escalation they never fully intended to create. That is exactly why the current situation is making diplomats nervous. Because even if Trump's objective is only to project strength, the military movements and aggressive rhetoric surrounding the crisis can still produce unintended consequences. And history shows this happens more often than people realize. Many international conflicts did not begin because leaders openly wanted full-scale war. They began because both sides believed the other would eventually back down. Until, suddenly, nobody did. That is the dangerous zone analysts believe the United States and Iran may now be approaching. Especially because today's geopolitical environment is far more unstable than it was several years ago. The region is fragmented. Alliances are shifting constantly. Proxy groups are heavily armed. And modern warfare no longer depends only on conventional armies. Cyber attacks, drone warfare, regional militias, economic pressure, information warfare. All of these tools can escalate tensions rapidly without a formal declaration of war ever happening. And that makes predicting Trump's next move even more difficult. Because with Trump, the line between strategic bluff and real escalation has often appeared intentionally blurred. That ambiguity itself may be part of the strategy, but it also increases the possibility that someone, somewhere, miscalculates the situation entirely. And if that happens, events could move faster than diplomacy can contain them. Which is why tonight, governments around the world are closely monitoring every statement, every military movement, and every sudden decision coming out of Washington. Because the next step could determine whether this remains a political pressure campaign or becomes the beginning of something far more dangerous. Right now, the world is entering one of those moments where uncertainty becomes extremely dangerous. Because the situation between Washington and Tehran is no longer just about political speeches or diplomatic tension. Something deeper appears to be happening behind the scenes. And when major powers begin operating in silence during a geopolitical crisis, global attention immediately intensifies. That is exactly what we are seeing tonight. Donald Trump's sudden schedule changes, the growing military speculation, and the increasingly aggressive rhetoric coming from multiple sides are all contributing to a climate of instability that feels more serious by the hour. Officially, no military operation has been announced, but unofficially, analysts, diplomats, and intelligence observers are all watching for the same thing. The signal that could indicate the crisis is moving into a completely different phase. Because history has shown that the most dangerous geopolitical escalations often happen very quickly. At first, there are only warnings, strong speeches, strategic movements, political pressure. Then, suddenly, one event changes everything. A strike, an attack, a retaliation. And within hours, the entire international landscape shifts. That is why governments around the world are now monitoring every detail coming out of Washington and the Middle East. Not only because of the military risks, but because the consequences of a major confrontation would extend far beyond the region itself. Global markets would react instantly. Oil prices could surge dramatically. International trade routes could face disruption. And several allied nations could be forced to take positions very quickly. In other words, the stakes are enormous. And this is precisely why Trump remains such a central figure in this story. Because whether people support him or oppose him, one reality remains undeniable. When Donald Trump enters a geopolitical crisis, unpredictability follows. Sometimes that unpredictability creates leverage, sometimes it creates fear, and sometimes it creates situations that become difficult to control. Tonight, nobody truly knows which direction this crisis is heading. Maybe this is a calculated pressure campaign designed to force Iran into retreat. Maybe it is political theater amplified by media speculation. Or maybe preparations are already advancing further than the public realizes. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes the current moment so tense. Because the difference between diplomatic pressure and military escalation can sometimes be measured in only a few hours. For now, the world waits, watching, analyzing, trying to understand whether the sudden movements surrounding Donald Trump are simply another geopolitical bluff, or the warning signs of a confrontation that could reshape the entire region.